Hey, Shawna, do you ever have clients that, for no apparent reason, seem to self sabotage themselves, even though they want to get to their healthy and happiest self?
I sure do. And I know it's so frustrating for them. And thankfully, our guest, Ramona Kossowan, has some answers as to why people tend to self sabotage. And she explains how she uses gentle trauma release methods to help clients move forward to be their best selves.
Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
Hi, Ramona. We're so happy to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
You know, it was really interesting meeting you at our networking group and having a chat because, we work with a similar niche in terms of helping women, but you really have a different spin on it.
Yeah, I like to call myself kind of a unicorn in the business because I have a unique combination of skills. And there will be overlap with other professionals like yourself, but it really isn't the same.
Well, maybe the client goals are similar because, our demographic tends to really focus on weight loss, but you achieve those goals somewhat differently. So can you tell us a little bit about how you used to coach and the struggles you came up against with your clients, and then what kind of twist and turn did you add to your coaching to address some of those struggles?
Sure. Well, I started out as an entrepreneur, actually following in my mother's footsteps. She became a herbalist and was really passionate about empowering people, especially women, with their health. And along that path, I became certified with this holistic weight loss program. So it was really good. Like, it was focused on a lot of actionable things and the gut health and things like that. But what I found is that some people were successful and a lot of the clients were women. And then some women really struggled and they just had these blocks. And it was frustrating for me because I felt incapable of helping certain women to have the outcome they want and to prioritize themselves. And that's what really it was about. It's not about losing X number of pounds in X number of months. It was about being able to make yourself a priority all the time. And when they couldn't, they felt so defeated and guilty and shameful and all these things. So in my journey, once I stepped into fitness and then recognized more so, it's like, I'm not just a fitness trainer. That's just not where I'm going to finish up, right? I don't want to do this all day, every day. And I learned more about empowerment coaching, working with the emotions. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally makes sense to me. And like, that lit me up. But when I became aware of trauma, because up until that point, I wasn't really trauma aware. I was aware that I'd been through some stuff and it affected me, but I'm like, that's not me. And then when I recognized trauma through my professor in one of my coaching programs, I learned how it was showing up in my clients, and that there was a way to work with trauma effectively, gently, and long term. I was like, sign me up. This is a full embodied, light me up from the inside. Yes. And now that I recognize, you can't unsee. Once you see, you can't unsee. So understanding that our unconscious nervous system and the subsequent thoughts and emotions are literally driving the bus almost all of the time. That's something that we need to consider when we're having a struggle.
So when you talk about clients that were not achieving success for you, would one of the telltale signs be like self-sabotage, like one step forward, two steps back?
Completely. So the all or nothing mentality, where you see women unfortunately chasing the next new thing and flinging themselves into it with a fresh burst of motivation. There's nothing wrong with that, but when you see it's a pattern that's defeating, this one we want to pull ourselves out. And the all or nothing, the stops and the starts, and absolutely you could name it. And then a lot of shame comes up as I sabotage myself. I set myself up, I get to a certain level, and then I just traipse back down to where I was. And procrastination as well, like you just freeze in your tracks and you can't put one foot in front of the other. Those are very strong indicators that there's some unfinished business. And if we can address that, the rest is going to be a lot more effective.
So how do you recognize, all right, so listeners might be like, oh, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Now what?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do have a tool I'll provide with my information to download. It's called a gentle trauma assessment. And society as a whole, you might think trauma is a buzzword, but let's not even label this, okay? We've been affected by stuff in our life, and sometimes it's showing up as unfinished business right now. And if there's a pattern showing up where it does not feel like your empowered self, this is where you get curious. There's a good chance there's some unfinished business there. So when I connect with a woman for coaching, I don't need her to tell me why she needs coaching. We're going to figure that out real quick. It's going to be like, I don't want this to go on anymore. I'm tired of feeling like this, this, and this, and I want to feel like that. It's like, okay, all right, let's get curious here. But when did these symptoms show up, and what was going on in your life?
And with procrastination, Ramona, tell me about how that shows up. Are there certain things when you're seeing certain patterns where maybe this person is procrastinating or this person is doing the self-sabotage? Are those related to different things going on?
It's all just a type of protection. So it's a nervous system protection. It's to protect you from failure. Typically, when I connect with a client for coaching, underneath there is a very strong aversion to failure, so to speak. A very strong aversion to letting people down, to not being good enough, or it's playing out in their actions is a lack of worthiness to take up space, to claim what's theirs, to take ownership of their well-being. So I just see that it's either lack of worthiness or protection from failure. And sometimes too, if you've reached your resilience threshold, your nervous system doesn't have the capacity for more stuff that's out of your comfort zone. So if you are at your resilience threshold, your body's like, no, we're not going to do that. And we're going to find a way to not do that. So let's see what we can do. And unconsciously, it's a protection.
So that might be generating the start-stop pattern or the procrastination pattern.
Yeah, so even you can equate it to, because the work I do is working with the nervous system. And think about the nervous system. So you have like the get up and go, and then the rest and digest, and then like the in-between connection, right? And then on the extreme ends is the survival responses, right? So the fight or flight, freeze and shut down, and then the undulating back and forth. So if you picture those actions, they really correlate with the nervous system. Picture a person who's in shutdown. Picture a person who's in fight or flight. It's going to be this frantic, all or nothing, fling myself into these things without listening and tuning into my body, because there is, when I'm working with the nervous system and trauma, there is a disconnect from your body. That's what trauma does. It's a disconnect from your body's messages.
So if you don't mind sharing, what was your journey of healing from trauma? And how did you heal from your trauma to become more empowered?
Well, like a lot of my clients, when I connect with women, they're quite often over 40, over 50, over 60. And what I found happen for me is my awareness changed. It's like, okay, I've been living in this way. This sucks. I hate myself. What is this going on? Right? And at some point, this is when things start to disintegrate, is because the ways you held yourself in these protective patterns start to fall apart. And that was happening for me, especially as I was an entrepreneur, because of being pushed out of my comfort zone and being seen it's like being exposed like a million times over. So I started with, life coaching, and it just create that awareness and that self-compassion. But ultimately, when I was going through these changes as an entrepreneur, and also it was during COVID, so everything was kind of crazy anyways, I was getting my certifications in coaching, and that brings a lot of introspection. Like I was forced to, face a lot of the things that I had avoided. And I did work with my own coaches for empowerment coaching and trauma release coaching, because you can't coach yourself.
Mhm.
And that was part of it. Excuse me. And then integrated. So with healing is the integrate. So I had to show up for myself over and over and over again, because we're never like just done with healing. Healing presents itself, but it doesn't need to be like an endless to-do list. I released a lot of significant trauma from my childhood working with my own coach. And then I recognized how to listen to myself better and show self-compassion.
So, what are some of the strategies that you use to this end? So, what would a client journey look like with you? You're working online, talking, homework, journaling. What do you do? How does this look?
A lot of the clients I've connected with have already been working on themselves extensively, and it's not for lack of trying. So usually when I connect with someone, it's like, you know what, this is going to look different and this is going to feel different, and it's like a breath of fresh air. So instead of it being like this grind and this homework, it's like relief, release on a bodily level, emotional level, and we do the work within our client calls. It's not you going and journaling. If you like that, that's cool, but I don't need you to journal ever to progress with this work. So it's very much partly therapeutic, because those skills are necessary, and coaching, and also my own intuitive and attunement to you as a person. I have to notice what's coming up for you and respond to that.
And you mentioned that you can't coach yourself, Ramona, and oftentimes we do that, or we attempt to do that. So why is that not possible?
Well, I find even when I work with skilled practitioners who are also trauma coaches, we can't hold space for ourselves like that, and we have blind spots. So yes, we can certainly do things for ourselves, and I do believe that we're not helpless. We're very empowered in many ways, but at certain levels, at certain sticking points, having, first of all, a witness. We need a safe witness to be present with us and guide us to the other side, so our body knows this is done. I'm done with this. And that's just hard to facilitate for ourselves in certain situations. Not everything, but when it is actually trauma, that's where someone who can hold space for you and guide you through it, because you're just going to collapse into it. You're not there to be the coach. You're taking your coaching hat off.
And how does this undealt with trauma affect us? We talked about some of the things with, just procrastination and not being your empowered self, but maybe some other ways that this can be really affecting people that they may or may not realize.
Yes, most of it is, I'd say, a lot of the people that I initially connect with do not realize that trauma is affecting them and that it's at play, and it can be subtle. So there can be obvious things that people have been through that we do identify as trauma, and there are many situations that we don't. It doesn't even really matter. It's how were you affected? So the symptoms, when the symptoms are the first thing that we look at together, I have a tool where we sit with the client and we notice what symptoms are coming up. There's physical, emotional, and cognitive symptoms, a long list of them. And then we get curious about when they showed up. So physically, quite often it's things like brain fog, headaches, and muscle rigidity and muscle armoring. Autoimmune conditions are very typical with trauma, and many more. Emotionally, it can be anxiety is very common, or depression. I don't mean clinical depression, but just that sense of lack of hope for a bright future, or kind of flat, like apathy, that disconnect. So you don't feel a lot of sadness, but you don't feel joy either. And cognitively, it can be things like brain fog and scattered thinking, lack of focus. So those are just to name a few.
Do you work with medical doctors? Like the things that you're mentioning, could also be symptoms of perimenopause, menopause, thyroid conditions. Like what do you suggest your clients, do in as well as addressing trauma? Because that might be a piece of it, but there might also be an underlying physical ailment that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so I don't diagnose anything, of course, but we look at, they're going to have their practitioners, and I'm just a piece of the puzzle. So I don't work with doctors because my work is considered a holistic and complementary method. And I always encourage women to be advocates for their well-being. So if they're going through menopause, they're going to have advocates that they're working with. And we just look at the pieces in the puzzle. If the symptoms emerged suddenly or intensified drastically after an event or a certain time in their life, that's a good area to get curious about. There's usually some trauma attached to that. And excuse me, worst case scenario, resolving trauma on a bodily level makes it easier to deal with what's left over, because you can't out supplement or out medicate a dysregulated nervous system from trauma. So when you can address the underlying root cause of trauma and resolve that on a bodily level, some of the symptoms go away or lessen greatly, and then their continued medical or holistic care becomes more effective.
Can you give us some examples of trauma that you've dealt with? I understand that like what might be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for someone else, but like we're just using this word of trauma.
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as I don't want to say simple to minimize the traumatic effect it might have on someone, but it might just be like like a unresponsive spouse, or it could be like domestic violence, or it could like sexual assault. Like there's like the gamut is long, like very wide. But can you give us examples of clients that you've worked with and things that you've addressed?
Yes. The foundation of the early work when I begin the coaching relationship with the client is we look at symptoms, what was going on, and then we get curious and we look for what's called core traumatic events. And these will be events that had a significant effect on you. Doesn't matter what they were, but they did. And a client will not always know this. This is uncovered through the coaching relationship. And when we resolve the core traumatic events that are anchoring the trauma in place, the rest just kind of goes, it becomes easy, insignificant, unbothersome. And then you can clean up whatever's left. So unfortunately, the people that I've worked with have been through some really unspeakable things. I have worked with, abusive people who've been in abusive relationships, sexual trauma, childhood physical abuse, loss of a loved one by suicide. I know these are triggering things, but I'm speaking the truth. Okay, so, and then there's the more insidious trauma, where you might dismiss. And this is typically relational trauma and childhood trauma. And even where there wasn't outright blatant abuse and neglect, is the feeling of no one listens to me, no one hears me, I don't matter, I'm only loved when I earn it, something's wrong with me. And that requires some healing and integration to rebuild that sense of self, because relational trauma can be quite more affecting because it's from another person, right? And it's quite often a person we trusted, or who we were in the care of, or an authority. And there's a sense of betrayal or abandonment. or neglect. So I work with all of those things, and the process is elegant and effective, and it's systematic. So I'm attuning to what's going on for the woman, and all of those things can be addressed.
I think what I was trying to get at is
Okay.
those insidious things. I'm glad you brought up, because a lot of us would just minimize that and say, like, heck, I've not been beaten. I've not,
Yeah.
I've not had those like big traumas. So what's my problem? So then we beat up ourselves and thinking like, just get over it. It's
Yeah.
nothing. But it's those little things like picking at a scab that you can never heal that make us from the inability to move forward. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, that the trauma I don't know, range can be like broad. And one person's trauma is equal to another's, even if the person thinks it's like, oh, it's not that bad. But if it's holding you back from moving forward, then it is something that should be addressed.
Yes, and it's the thing that I think is really helpful to understand is it's limiting. So you may be functioning and doing pretty okay in a lot of ways, but it's limiting. It's limiting your pain because of that disconnect, but it's limiting your joy, your connection, your expansion, your growth, your courage. And so I like to try to preface it with, this doesn't need to be a big, scary thing. You've already been through big, scary things. That's done. But we want you to now be okay. We want you to feel worthy, lovable, courageous, bold, strong,
Joyful.
whatever it is. And those insidious things are not a one and done. It's a heal and integrate experience, but it is very doable. And it does, you don't need to worry about who had it worse than you. It's entirely irrelevant what anyone else's experience is. It does not matter one bit.
Yeah, I really like how you've brought that up, because we can't minimize anybody else's experience, because what's traumatic for one might not be for another. But it's like I said, it still needs to be, should be addressed if the person is going to thrive. And like, I know from personal experience that we do learn behavior patterns that serve us at the time, but by continuing those movement patterns, I'm back into the gym, those behavior patterns, they don't necessarily serve us as we move forward. So from my understanding, you're just asking a person to take a step back. What's happening? What are you doing? How's that serving you? What could I do differently?
And when there's trauma involved, you can cognitively know it doesn't change anything, because it's a nervous system response. It's unconscious and it's powerful. Our body is powerfully trying to protect us. So I like to think about it as taking that weight off your shoulder, those dirty lenses off your face, and feeling the expansion, being able to expand. And it doesn't need to mean that you've been through something catastrophic, although a lot of women have been, and they minimize that. It doesn't mean you've had something that's really brutal happen to you. But if there's that erosion of that sense of emotional safety within yourself, then this is something to get curious about. How am I going to become the woman I need to be?
And what does that look like when you are working with someone or have worked with someone and they're working through these things? As far as results wise, what are you seeing that they're able to, where are they able to get to that they weren't when they started?
It's all encompassing. Literally, there's no aspect of your life that is not affected by releasing trauma. It's the most joyful. It's like watching a flower blossom, right? So when, for example, when you're recognizing women with sabotage and procrastination and that sort of thing with their bodies, when the trauma is addressed, which there always is, it becomes almost effortless to stay connected to your body. And women who've had decades of struggling with their weight, suddenly it's effortless to eat mindfully and move and do courageous things they couldn't do, because you're now inhabiting your body. You're not separated from it. It affects your self-worth, and everything changes in how you show up in life when you see your worth. everything you do will be different when you see your worth. So think about that in terms of your career, your business, your relationships, how you advocate for yourself, the type of love you're able to receive rather than block or limit. There's literally every aspect of life can shift in a more expansive way. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect and it's sunshine and rainbows, but you become okay and you become resilient.
And on the flip side, what is that like when people are just living in that separation from their body and not dealing with that? What does that look like, and how long can that go on?
For some people, unfortunately, too long, but I like to call that survival mode. So there might be an autopilot sense, rinse, repeat, but there's nothing fulfilling or joyful or connected about it. Or there might be a lot of ways that you're disconnecting from your body, like being uber busy, eating mindlessly, binging, overindulging, using narcotics and booze, flinging yourself in from one relationship to the next with serial dating, anything that distracts you from being able to be present with yourself. I see a
Wow.
lot of nodding.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, that we live in such a fast-paced world, and busyness is so idolized. You ask someone, "How are you?" "Oh, I'm busy." Like, that's a good thing. I mean, yes, it's good to be busy, I guess, but really, it's more satisfying to be like, "Hey, I'm at peace. I'm doing what I love. I have a moment to myself." But nobody says that. Everyone is just like, "Oh, I'm busy," like that is the badge of honor, and that's not. That I can. I'm glad you brought that up as a sign that, hey, if you're always putting more and more on your plate so that you actually don't have time for yourself, it might be a sign that, hey, you need to slow down. And probably doesn't mean that you need to, go to an island for 6 months and like turn off your phone and not talk to anybody, but maybe just give yourself a moment to hold space for yourself and reflect.
Yeah, so this can show up in an extreme discomfort and extreme avoidance of stillness, emotional stillness, mental stillness, physical stillness. And if it seems like that manic hamster wheel, yeah, society feeds that, but you're playing a part in it.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, we all know people, and we've probably all been that person where when there's quiet, the TV has to go on. I'm on social media. I need to get some music going. I'm going to listen to a podcast because heaven forbid I be stuck with my own thoughts.
Exactly. So it can show up in so many ways, and it makes it hard to enjoy being with your body and care for your body like the loving way you would care for this vessel when you're disconnected from it. And that's a trauma symptom.
So, to give perspective and hope for anyone that's listening that is saying, "Oh my gosh, that's me," like, how long is it going to take to get my head on straight? Like, how long do you typically work with people? Like, how do you know when, you're moving that boulder up the hill and then it gets a little easier? Give us a
Well,
time frame. It's probably different for everyone, but
yeah, I like to think of it as just a gentle process. So you don't have to feel like you're working hard. I do the work. Um, Typically, I work with women for 6 weeks to 6 months. So 6 weeks, quite often women will say, "You helped me more in 3 weeks than I did in 2 years of therapy." So just to get that release and that moving forward and that shift in perspective, it can happen very quickly. That being said, there's no quick fixes. I don't say that. But 6 weeks to 6 months. And 6 months is more for the healing and integration and developing that sense of self, working with your inner critic and your body intuition and all the things that help you navigate life trauma free rather than in survival mode and bouncing around with your triggers and your avoidance of triggers. We don't want to live like that. So that's typical. Some women will work with me a little longer and it transitions more into a trauma aware life coach where a woman is literally rebuilding her life from the bottom up after decades of pain. So that's worst case scenario where they're still experiencing joy and rebuilding. But literally from the first call, relief begins. It's right away.
And this has kind of opened up a new field for you that's pretty exciting. And there's a large demographic. Tell us a little bit about whom you enjoy working with and have, speaking of rebuilding, tell us about that woman.
So quite often I connect with women who are over 40 and over 50 because, well, that's my age, right? And also, I get you, I got you, woman. But at this point, we reach the place where I am done with. So there's a list of something we're done with, whether it's the dysfunctional relationship, the lack of boundaries, the total self-sacrifice, or the neglecting your body, whatever it is. Or you're like, I really want to feel this way, or I really want to live this way. So when I connect with women in that place, they're so vested in their well-being, like in wanting to get to a better place, that the results that they have sometimes literally blows my mind, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, you were like a different person. And I think just at midlife, we've lived out those patterns long enough that we realize that something's got to change, and we're really ready for a change. Whereas before, we're not, maybe not so much.
Yeah, and we're just, I'll just try this again. I know it didn't work last time, but I'm changing this one thing. I'm going keto. Now I'm going carnivore. Now I'm going to do Pilates. Now I'm going to do so there's always, trying all these things with the zealous approach that then they quit, self-sabotage, feel guilty, shame, procrastinate, and then find something else to dive into, whether it's the dating pool or whatever. And I know that a large demographic that you're working with now is women that are facing end of a relationship, like a marriage, because that's a huge rebuilding, and having a little help along the way to kind of recognize, where you can make personal improvements, but also give yourself credit for the beautiful person that you are that nobody actually gives themselves credit for. So you're shining that mirror on someone in a realistic way to help them see the goodness in them so that they can give themselves some grace.
Yeah, I like to tell women you're not broken, because sometimes women feel like they're broken. Like, you aren't broken. The real you is still there. She never left. She's just buried under a lot of protection right now. So we're going to help you reconnect with her so you feel safe for her to come out. And yeah, divorce is a major catalyst. Like a woman could be living with trauma for years and decades before divorce, but that catalyst just pushes them beyond their resilience, or pushes them to the place where they're really done with feeling that way, and they're really ready to embrace taking care of themselves emotionally, mentally, and physically. And I love to meet women there because I'm really excited to meet them on that journey.
Yeah, the possibilities. If you had a wish for our listeners today, Ramona, what would it be?
My wish would be to choose what cultivates your worthiness. So in every scenario, what makes me feel worthy? Choose that.
That's a tough one. It's a hard one
Choose
to
that.
beat. Alli, what's your wish?
My wish would be that we do get help. If we feel like we're in that place, then we need that coach. It's rather than trying to go it alone. Yeah, getting some help.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you that you can't see the whole picture when you're inside the frame. So having those outside eyes and guidance, and it's not a forever thing, and it doesn't mean that you're weak. The strongest people are the ones that reach out for help. And so if any of our listeners are in a place of feeling stuck, or any of the things that we described in today's episode, then Ramona's there. We're here. There's a whole community out there. Find somebody that's going to help.
Yes, we have a shout out. So before we say goodbye, I want to give a shout out to one of our Girls Talk Healthy Aging listeners, Miss Kim Thomas, and say thanks so much for listening and supporting Girls Talk Healthy Aging. Mwah.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.